Hi everyone, welcome and thank you so much for joining our first ever online thank you event. We are delighted to have you this evening. My name's Georgia and I'm going to be hosting. So just before I get into anything, I'm going to take you through some housekeeping. It's a live event, so you won't be able to turn your cameras or microphones on. If it's helpful, you can turn on captions, so subtitles. If you press the CC button, depending on which device you're using, it'll either be on the bottom corner, left-hand corner, or on the top. Normally it's on the bottom, so take a look there first. Because you can't speak and we won't be able to see you, there is a question and answer function. Hopefully you'll be able to see the little speech mark boxes on the top with the question mark. If you click into there, you can ask us questions. So we've got a Q&A session at the end, so please keep asking questions in there as we go along. But also, if you're having any technical difficulties, please do pop your questions in there. We've got a wonderful team working in the background, so they'll be able to help you and make sure things are running smoothly. Finally, we are recording this event, so we'll be able to share that with you later if you missed anything or want to go through anything again. So I've been asked to talk to you a little bit about myself. So as I said, I'm Georgia. I'm a legacy manager and I work in the legacy administration team here at the Trust. What that means is essentially I have the privilege of helping executors with administering legacies left to us by our supporters in their will. It's quite a diverse role. Every day is different for me, but yeah, so I can have days where I'm pouring through estate accounts, looking at trust calculations, inheritance tax calculations, speaking with lots of solicitors, other legacy advisors. But what I also do, and it's the most important and enjoyable part of my role, is speaking with loved ones of our supporters. And what that means to me is being able to get to know our supporters and making sure that we are adhering to the wishes that are left in the will. So yeah, it's a real privilege, and I always find it inspiring to see what generosity we're given and why people love the Trust as much as I do. Just to give you a little bit of background into my connection with the Trust. So it's been a long time. I grew up in Cornwall on the North Coast. So my connection with the Trust started at a young age. The town I lived in, essentially the Trust cares for most of the land, most of the beaches, most of the coastline along where I live. And that meant that, well, I like to say that my back garden was National Trust essentially. So I grew up in nature, grew up in running around the beaches and enjoying the countryside and the outdoors. My family always took me to National Trust places, properties around Cornwall and Devon too. So yeah, I know lots of the properties around here, but I also, now I'm older and I have my weekends to myself, I get to go and enjoy places further afield too. So yeah, National Trust is never far away from me, even in my spare time. Yeah, so just to say a bit of a thank you to you. So thank you for your ongoing support, for your wonderful generosity by donations and also by leaving us a gift in your will. Donations and gifts and wills are so important to us. We simply could not carry out all our vital work without them. I certainly see firsthand what a significant impact a gift and a will makes. I see it on a daily basis with the gifts I deal with speaking to on property teams and experts like you'll be hearing from in a moment. So yeah, a big thank you from all of us. And as a way of thanking you, we're honoured for you to join us this evening to give you a little bit of insight into archaeology at National Trust. So just to take you through the itinerary, I'm obviously speaking at the moment, and then in a minute I'm going to be passing over to Tom, who's going to take us through a national look at archaeology at the Trust. And then once we've heard from Tom, we'll hear from Angus, who's going to take us through a deep dive into archaeology work at Wimpole. Once we've heard from both speakers, we're then going to have about 20 minutes for questions, so plenty of time. So I'd just like to encourage you to ask as many questions as you want, and we'll go through them later on. And then we'll be finishing after that. So yeah. Hopefully you'll have a really nice time. Just a big thank you from me again, and I'll pass you over to Tom.
Hello, good evening everyone. It's lovely to be with you tonight. Yes, I'm Tom Dommett. I'm the head of historic environment for the National Trust and head of profession for our archaeologists at the Trust. You're meeting one of them this evening, the amazing Angus, which I think is his official stage name. But we actually have around 20 archaeologists across the Trust at any one time, and they are an amazing group who I'm really proud to work in service of. With the most incredible range of knowledge and expertise. If you ever get the chance to pin one down, possibly in a pub over a drink, I would recommend it. And very broadly speaking, my remit, I suppose, is both the stuff. Essentially, if it's old and it doesn't have a roof on it, although in truth our archaeologists are also very heavily involved with our historic buildings and object collections as well, but also the practice of archaeology as a way of understanding that stuff, which includes a huge range of approaches in our toolkit, from using airborne laser scanning to explore the lumps and bumps of whole landscapes, to examining tiny preserved pollen grains in peat bogs, and right the way through to things like experimental archaeology, and of course excavation too. Next slide, please. And it's through all of those different techniques that we can show what an incredibly diverse historic environment is in our care at the Trust. It ranges from early prehistory all the way through to the Cold War. You can see just a selection of some images of some of dare I say, iconic sites across the Trust that are in our care, ranging from the largest stone circle in the world at Avebury, through to the amazing set of Wessex hill forts, to Chedworth Roman Villa, to a number of World Heritage sites, including places like Fountains Abbey and Studley Royal, and down in the bottom right corner, nuclear research facilities at Orfordness. So an amazing and I would say unparalleled collection, really. The sites that many children will learn about in school, the sort of type sites for their periods. So they really are a special set of sites and landscapes, nearly 2,000 scheduled monuments, parts of a number of World Heritage sites. And that historic environment really is everywhere. Every inch of the UK has been subject to some form of modification by humans, and there are usually thousands of years of human activity, layer upon layer, beneath us and around us, which is the evidence of how we have responded and related and interacted with our environments, and is an amazing source from which we can learn. Next slide, please. So we sometimes think of it as being the warp and weft of our landscapes, what really gives them their character, their identity, their stories, and the historic environment is really ingrained across our landscapes. And whether that's, thinking of the Cornish tin mining landscapes of Botelach and Levant that you can see up in the top left, whether it's the dense prehistoric field systems of the South Downs that you can see in the top right there, revealed by airborne laser scanning beneath the woodlands which have preserved them, through to the networks of dry stone walls and trackways that define those pastoral landscapes of the English uplands. And actually the video you can see here is one of our wonderful former apprentice archaeologists, Harry, whose apprenticeship was actually funded through a legacy gift, talking about the ritual landscape of prehistoric death and burial on the ridgeways of the South Downs and at Ditchling Beacon near Brighton. And below, gradually appearing and disappearing, you can see in the overlay in the bottom left the traces of the deserted medieval settlement at the Gumby estate, with roadways and ridge and furrow and evidence of the settlement platforms. that you can see there. And archaeology really is that way of the way of seeing a place. It's a way of questioning it, of seeing it in a new light, and how we value these stories and the character of our places. And I thought I might actually quote from one of our former National Trust archaeologists in one of his blog posts, but musing about a similar site to Gumby at Hidcot in the southwest. And he wrote, "The long winter shadows ripple across the undulations of the common field farming system. This was one large arable field with villagers working scattered strips, the ridges, with their neighbours. I guess there were chats when they rested, as we do today, down the allotment, over the garden fence. How did you cope with that late frost? Too much rain? Not enough. What happened to the summer this year?" And I love that because it speaks to archaeology really as a way of putting the people back into our places. Often we think of these landscapes as being somehow natural or empty, and actually archaeology is an amazing way of putting the people back into place, and of seeing the world around us differently, of imagining it differently. And that's a wonderful thing, this kind of blending of science and art that is archaeology. And we want everyone to have that superpower, actually, to be inspired by the history around them, whether it's at our places or outside their front door, and to unlock their imaginations. And we know that actually our ability to imagine the past and to relate to our ancestors is really connected to our ability to imagine the future and imagine different futures and have empathy for those who will come after us. And that's a really important thing today, and something that archaeology can really support. And one of the great things about archaeology is it can get us to the lives of ordinary people. It can move us beyond the kings and the queens, to those stories of the people who really have kind of shaped our landscapes, and lived them, whether it's the brick makers or the farmers, the broom squires, the quarrymen, and then working the, the woodlands for charcoal and so on. And it's a great way of telling those untold stories and hearing those unheard voices and engaging in a conversation with the past that can open up new perspectives on how the world has been and how it could be. Next slide, please. Now it's something of a media trope to present stunned and baffled archaeologists, and there are a good number of headlines that reflect that. And the truth is, we're usually slightly less stunned, but our archaeologists have a huge range of expertise across different periods and landscapes and archaeological techniques. And you can see on the right just some of the sort of breaking headlines that reflect some of the work that we are involved with across the National Trust estate. And some of that really is about sort of rewriting history in a lot of ways, whether that's redefining what the end of Roman Britain looked like at Chedworth through the redating of the mosaics there, through to reimagining the Cerne Abbas giant as an Anglo-Saxon rallying point. And we're also making use of all sorts of new tools and techniques and technologies. It's one of the wonderful things about archaeology and archaeologists, where we can be a bit like magpies sometimes, picking up on new techniques. And those are all opening up the way to new sets of discoveries. So things like the airborne laser scanning I talked about earlier in the South Downs, allowing us to look beneath the trees and peel back whole landscapes, through to ground penetrating radar and other ways of seeing beneath the ground. And there are absolutely more discoveries to come at Trust Places. We have around about 100,000 archaeological sites and monuments recorded in our archaeology database at the moment. We do add around 2,500 every year through the surveys and the discoveries that we make. And on average, over the last 10 years, I think a new archaeological excavation has started on Trust land about once every 2 weeks, which is kind of amazing, actually, the ongoing discoveries that we have. Some of those are led by what we call in archaeology sort of traditional development management, so things like the construction of new visitor facilities, new car parks, and in fact this little chap you can see in the middle right was unearthed as part of the archaeological work linked to the car park at Wimpole. And perhaps you'll be seeing a little bit more of him later, I don't know. But which also actually beyond that little chap revealed the most amazing Iron Age and Romano-British settlement site as well. But our discoveries also come from more research-led approaches, and partnerships are a huge part of what we do. So working with Derbyshire Caving Club to record the amazing abandoned Napoleonic cobalt mine at Alderley Edge, which is the video that just concluded there, or working with Bradford University to reveal a whole new side to Fountains Abbey and the discovery of a truly enormous tannery building. And I think part of that is about how these discoveries can really open the door to fundamentally different views and different experiences of our places. So at Fountains Abbey, you might contrast that traditional view of a place of worship and indeed with the tranquility of the site today, with the discovery of that truly enormous industrial site worked by the Lay brothers, 50 feet wide, 100 feet long, at least 2 stories tall, and the noise and the smell, frankly, that would have accompanied it rather. So archaeology really does give us really different new ways to look at our places. Next slide, please. And increasingly, there is another driver for our work, and that's our response to the nature and climate crisis, which will mean change at the landscape scale. And we really believe that the historic environment and archaeology has a major role to play here, actually, and that there's a real opportunity for discovery too. It's a really exciting time. So, for instance, on the Attingham estate in Shropshire, our plans for woodland creation there led us to undertake our biggest ever geophysical survey, around 1,000 hectares of land. And it actually revealed the most incredible buried remains on the edge of the Roman city of Wroxeter, including a number of villas, cemeteries, and military and industrial features. And so not only could we design our tree planting to avoid impacting on the most sensitive remains, and indeed effectively doubled the area for potential tree planting on the estate by getting that understanding of the archaeology, but we can now also interpret that incredible landscape for our visitors and even consider future programs of fieldwork to explore those remains more. So more nature and more history, these things really can and do work together. And the natural environment and the historic environment are fundamentally just part of our environment. They're a 10,000 year long relationship between people and nature. And it's really important for us to remember that connection that we all have. But we can also use the historic environment as a way to combat our shifting baseline syndrome, I suppose, that leads us to think that the abundance, or rather the lack of abundance, of nature that we have today is somehow normal. And we can get a view of the richness of nature in the past. And you can see some of the headlines in the top left that were linked to our work around blossom and the disappearance of many of our traditional orchards from our landscape, nearly 94% since 1900. And so archaeology in the historic environment can be a really important way of helping us consider what's normal and what isn't normal, and certainly to imagine a different future. It can also really help us think about those practical restoration opportunities, so where we can read those signatures of lost habitats in the landscape, things like water meadows, which are incredibly biodiverse systems, or medieval charcoal burning platforms, which might tell us about an area that was once formerly wooded. And indeed, we know that some of those restoration practices can be more successful when they are restoration of things that were once there. So for instance, dew ponds is a great example where actually creating a new dew pond is much less effective than restoring an old one where you can reactivate the dormant seed beds and ensure it establishes much faster. And the historic environment can also tell us about all those different species and habitats of the past, like the archaeological remains of beavers that we recover, and the paleo-environmental time capsules of pollen and beetle remains, which can tell us about Bronze Age environments, or indeed things like the medieval dry stone walls in the Yorkshire Dales, which were designed with an overhang that you can read now, and that was there to prevent the wolves, which once roamed there in the not so distant past, from jumping over them. But I think more than anything else, it shows us that connection, that role and responsibility of humans in shaping and managing landscapes. Things like the amazing chalk grassland of the South Downs, which have been created and maintained through millennia of land use. And so in a lot of different ways, the historic environment and those archaeological perspectives can directly and indirectly support our work for nature. And at the same time, we're working to respond to the impacts of natural processes like coastal change. We have many hundreds of known archaeological sites at risk or actively eroding. And these also present an amazing opportunity. So, for instance, you can see in the middle left picture the prehistoric hilltop settlement at Dinastinll. I think my Welsh is passable, just about there, in North Wales. And that eroding hill fort was partly excavated working with local communities and schools, and revealed, amongst other things, the base of an amazing roundhouse. And rather than reburying it, as would be a sort of traditional archaeological practice to preserve those remains, actually recognizing its inevitable loss and the inevitable change of that landscape and that feature, we were actually able to leave it exposed, to present it and to interpret it, so that it can deliver more benefit, more enjoyment to people while it's still there. And there is the potential here, actually, I think, for a massive national programme addressing our coastal heritage, using it as a vehicle, really, to build engagement with communities, to raise awareness around climate change, and to give people a chance to get really hands-on with the past. And I must mention in the bottom two pictures, our amazing heritage and archaeology ranger teams, who are a really important part of the future of our historic environment. Their core work monitoring our heritage assets and helping us to direct our conservation activity, whether that's in response to heritage crime, whether it's storm damage or erosion from visitor activity. We still have to think of the archaeology out in our landscapes, like the beautiful rugs in our mansions, which need to have the same care and experience the same sense of wear and tear in a lot of ways. And we now actually have over, I think, 70 of those heritage and archaeology ranger volunteer teams, over 600 people involved and continuing to grow. They play a really important role in looking after our heritage for the future. Next slide, please. I suppose ultimately we do what we do, and we love archaeology because of the power that it has to enrich people's lives. We want to do exciting archaeology, and archaeology that's really about people. And we really want to share it with others, because we know what fun it can be. I really want to actually call out at this point our Robert Kiln Fund for Archaeology for supporting some of the vital work that we do that that links archaeology with the people that value and can benefit from our sites. And that Robert Kiln Fund has allowed us to do archaeology with young carers on the Attingham estate, to do community excavations at Erdig and Chirk in Wales, to Small Hyde and Scotney Castle in Kent, as well as helping us do bits of scientific analysis at Chedworth and at Alderley Edge, both sites that I mentioned earlier. And all of that amazing engagement work is really what we want to do more of, and we need support to make that happen, to make more opportunities for more people to get hands-on, to do and to benefit from archaeology, including schools and children and young people. We really want to work more closely with things like the Young Archaeologist Clubs, and thinking about actually careers into archaeology. Our apprentices, the wonderful Harry, who you might have seen cropping up in this video. Harry's something of a media star for us. We want to be able to share more of our work through film and publications, but also through amazing innovative digital interpretation that we're working on at various places to help us really have the eyes to see the past. It's not something that always speaks immediately. We want to go further as part of our work with the Council for British Archaeology's Festival of Archaeology, which has now become a fantastic fixture of activity in a lot of trust places in the last 2 weeks of July every year. I think over 100 places will be taking part this year to delivering more activities, but actually also reaching out more to connect the stories of our places with the communities that live beyond them, because we see the need for that cultural connectivity just as much as we need that wildlife and habitat connectivity. We really want to do that collaboration as well with more archaeological societies with a really thriving grassroots archaeology in the UK. That's really what will underpin a sustainable future for our heritage, is that mass acts of caring for it. And we want to use our archaeology and historic environment to drive creativity, to inspire people. And we want to work with bodies like the Young Poets Network. We want to encourage the use of our historic environment for more artistic interventions and creative approaches. So there are so many areas where we want to go further, so that we can realize the genuine power of archaeology to deliver benefits for people, so that more people can enjoy our places through that creative and inspiring and compelling lens of the past, and so that we can respect and care for the distinct character of our landscapes, and really treasure those stories of the people that have shaped them. So I think on that note, I should hand over to the amazing Angus, to perhaps bring all of this to life through one of the wonderful places that I've briefly mentioned over at Wimpole.
Hello, everybody. Yes, I'm Angus Wainwright. I'm the archaeologist working for the National Trust in the East. And can I have the next slide, please? I'm going to be talking to you about the archaeology of Wimpole, and here's a picture of aerial picture of Wimpole Hall looking south. Now, Wimpole is on the west side of Cambridgeshire. There's a very fine mansion, very beautiful gardens, wonderful park, all surrounded by tenant farms. But I'm going to be looking underground, as it were, underneath all this beautiful stuff you can see on the surface. And the archaeology I'm going to be talking to you about is not spectacular. It's not the burial places of pagan kings or massive stone circles. Picking up on one of the themes that Tom was talking about, we're going to be really looking at the everyday stories of country folk over a 5,000 year period, and how they've related to their surroundings and molded their surroundings, and we get to understand them through archaeology and history. And in my mind, these people are just as interesting as those pagan kings at Sutton Hoo or the Neolithic priests at Avebury. Can I have the next slide, please? Yeah, so this slide just shows some of the sources and some of the archaeological products that we've generated at Wimpole, and I'd just like to pay tribute at this stage to well, it's 40 years of work by volunteers and professionals doing all sorts of different archaeology, and that's been funded in all sorts of different ways. Tom mentioned the car park excavation. That's a conventional piece of development archaeology paid for by the National Trust itself. But we've also been funded by private donors to do some work, and we'll see some of that later on, and bequests as well. And this is an accumulating these are accumulating studies which are gradually accumulating more and more knowledge about the past at Wimpole. We know an awful lot, but there's an awful lot we don't know as well. So this is 40 years of work, but it's a story which is ongoing. And in fact, I'm just commissioning 2 further bits of archaeology to happen this year. So more little pieces of the story gradually being added. Can I have the next slide? So I'm going to focus this talk really on 2 particular periods within this long story of Wimpole Hall, and I'm going to focus first on the late 17th century. What you're looking at here is a map from 1638 of this bit. Is just a little section of the map around Wimpole Hall, and I'm going to be looking at one particular little hamlet. If the little red dot can just show it to you, that little area down there. So that's an area called Benelend, part of the medieval settlement at Wimpole. And in 1638, Benjamin Hare was crisscrossing Sir Thomas Chichely's estate with his surveyor's chain, measuring all the little fields and all the little strips of land which made up the farming landscape of Wimpole. And if you look at the map, you can see a big A in black, and perhaps you can see that that area is all divided up into little strips. And what you probably can't do is read that in each one there's a tenant's name and the acreage of that individual strip, and the whole of this map is all covered with these strips with all the tenants' names in them and all their acreages. And what Benjamin Hare was doing for Thomas Chichely was essentially valuing his land and working out how much land each of his tenants was farming. And we'll come on to why they were doing that in a while. If we go on to the next slide. So this is a archaeological survey of the earthworks of Benelend, just a little part of the village Wimpole, and it's got my terrible biro markings on it, and you can see the tenants' names which are written in biro, and we can actually stand on all their houses as they were marked on that Benjamin Hare map. And I'm going to be just focusing on 2 of them. Just down in the bottom left, there's John Pratt, and opposite him lived William Whitton. And if you go on to the next slide, so we're trying to work out a little bit more about the lives of these people based on a combination of archaeology and history. So from the church records, we can look at John Pratt and William Whitton's family trees. So you can see that John Pratt married Agnes Smith, and he had 2, 4, 6 children. And at the time, Benjamin Hare was going around Chichely's estate with his surveying chain. Those are the children's ages at the time in red, and you can see 2 children have already died, illustrating infant childhood mortality in the 17th century. Below is William Whitton and his family, and in blue are the calculations of the land that they were tenants of. So John Pratt is tenant of 6.5 acres. That's nowhere near enough to be self-supporting. So he was a smallholder with some of his own land, and he would be working for bigger folk like William Whitton, who had 103 acres. So he's a yeoman farmer. And we know from the half tax, which was a sort of kind of early form of income tax, I guess, that William Whitton had 3 hearths in his house, 3 fireplaces. So that's probably a 2-story, 6-room house, a rather nice timber frame house, which if it was still around would be selling for an awful lot of money in Cambridge, right near Cambridge at the moment. Whereas John Pratt, he's in a 1/2 house that will be a 1-story house with maybe only 2 rooms. So there'll be 2 rooms with him and his large family living in it. And those are the houses which don't survive to be executive homes anymore. They were built out of flimsy wood, and they've nearly all decayed and rotted away, whereas some of the yeoman houses like Mr. Whitton's still stand today. So we can people the past a bit from archaeology and history in terms of these everyday folk at Wimpole. But we have to go to get a sort of more of a feel for their lives. We have to go to some other sources. So if you can just show me the next slide. So we have, from around this time, we have illuminated manuscripts. I mean, this is really medieval rather than 17th century, but it gives us an idea about what John Pratt and William Whitton would have been up to most of the time, labouring in the fields. So it takes a day to plough an acre of ground, and also about a day to reap that crop with a scythe. And you've got the plough working, the harrowing and the spreading of the seed. And if you look carefully, you can see some pigeons eating the seed. And pigeons, there was a dovecot at Wimpole that was owned by Thomas Chicheley, and they were very unpopular because the Lord's doves went flying out and ate all his tenants' seeds and got nice and fat that way for him to eat in the winter. But it wasn't all hard labour. If you go on to the next picture, so here's a Bruegel picture, and a bit nearer the time of Benjamin Hare's map making. So this is a wedding feast. This would have been a familiar scene in Benall End and Wimpole back in the 17th century, but of course it leaves no archaeological trace and no historic trace, apart from the fact that we know about John Pratt's, who John Pratt married. His wedding may well have been something like this, with all his neighbours, even Grand Mr. Whitton, coming along to celebrate his wedding. All that survives in archaeology is what you can see down in the bottom left corner, which is a heap of stoneware flagons, German stoneware flagons, which are very commonly found around this period in archaeological excavations. Okay, let's have the next slide, please. So back to that aerial view. Now the reason I'm coming back to this is the reason why Thomas Chicheley had invited Benjamin Hare to come and survey his land was that, I'm very sorry about that, everybody. I don't know what happened there. Yes, so what happened was that Thomas Chicheley got Benjamin Hare in to value his land, essentially, and what he realised was it was much more valuable if he farmed it directly. So he evicted all those tenants, John Pratt, William Whitton, they all left, and he laid out new farms. So that landscape you can see in the background of this slide with the farms and the fields, that was all a creation of Thomas Chicheley and his team. And where Benel End used to be is now under the trees to the right of Wimpole Hall in this picture. Now all that survives of it is some lumps and bumps under the parkland trees. So my two sort of theme-based sort of periods I've chosen are both periods where great upheaval happened. I mean, this particular event changed every aspect of Wimpole. All the roads changed, all the fields changed, all the people living there changed. Much more violent change than has happened in our lifetime, although we see, you know, big changes in the countryside. This was a real revolution, and it just illustrates how the countryside goes through periods of stability and then periods of great change, and people have to cope with them in one way or another. Okay, so we're going to leave, if we can have the next slide, we're going to leave 17th century Wimpole and go galloping back to the Iron Age. And what we're looking at here is geophysics, the results of geophysics. So these are techniques that help us look underground at archaeological evidence without digging it up. So in this particular field, right on the north edge of the Wimpole estate, you can see lots of grey lines, and where the little red dot is going to indicate, you can perhaps see something that looks like a face with two round circles. Those are hut circles, so that gives you an idea of the scale. So that's a little farm with two hut circles in it, and the other lines are stock enclosures and field boundaries associated with that settlement. And you can maybe see some sort of grey lines going vertically up that field, and that's the ridge and furrow, those strips you saw on the Benjamin Hare map, which were all done away with by Thomas Chicheley. And this was, we did this survey because this is one of the Trust tree planting projects. This field was coming out of arable agriculture and going to be planted up as woodland, and we wanted to make sure we weren't planting trees on sensitive archaeology. So that's why we did the geophysics, and then when we planned the tree planting, we naturally didn't plant trees over this really interesting looking settlement, which we didn't know about at all. There's no earthworks showing anymore. This is just a smooth arable field, or was. So if you go on to the next slide. So everywhere we looked with our geophysics, unfortunately for the tree planters, we kept finding archaeology. So this is right over on the other side of the estate. The black and white dotted line going along the bottom is a Victorian metal water pipe, but the red dot's going to show you what somebody just described as a squid here, which is another prehistoric settlement. We metal detected and we field walked this. We got no evidence at all, so we didn't know what date it was. So one of our donors and contributed some money so we could excavate a couple of little trial trenches over this site. And if you go on to the next slide, so that you can see in a sort of orangey colour the geophysics results, and then you can see the two trenches that we dug, and that revealed that this was an Iron Age settlement with a hut circle in the right hand area, the head of the squid, and then a lot of ditches of various periods in the other trench. So like a lot of sites, once you excavate them, you realise they've had a long and complicated life with lots and lots of changes in different periods, which the archaeologists have to unpick. But we were able to find and see as part of a complicated farming landscape where they were raising pigs and sheep and cows, and there was woodland nearby, and actually where the ditches joined, when it had been abandoned, that had formed a pond, and they found frog bones in that area, sort of indicating it's changed from a sort of a busy settlement into a sort of rural pond. So geophysics can take you some of the way, but you really need to excavate to really uncover the details of people's lives in this distant period of the past. And can I have the next slide? The next slide shows a reconstruction of a similar settlement. This is actually from Attingham, a reconstruction of one of the sites at Attingham where Tom mentioned a great big massive geophysics project has been undertaken, which found some Roman villas, but it also found some Iron Age sites. So this gives you an idea of what our site might have looked like at Wimpole. Next slide. But to add in more information, we, of course, objects tell us stories. So this is the strange little man that came out of the car park excavation, also from the Iron Age. So we're beginning to pick up this picture of Iron Age settlement and farming right across the Wimpole estate with many of these sites, and we've just seen a couple of them. But this finds related archaeology is where our volunteers contribute most. So if I can have the next picture. So I think it's now, Mike's not in that picture, but one of our volunteers in this team, Mike, has been a volunteer for 40 years, mostly working on Wimpole, and he's part of a group called the Cambridge Archaeological Field Group, and they do field walking. So this is part of the field walking team, and field walking is what, as the name implies, you walk across a ploughed field, which you gridded up beforehand, and you plot all your finds on a plan of that field to see where the settlements of different periods are. And you can add to that with the next slide, metal detecting. And this is Martin, one of our volunteer metal detectorists, who obviously find metal objects. And, you know, one of the classic dating bits of evidence are coins, of course. So by adding the metal finds to the pottery finds from the field walking, we begin to build up a picture. So if you go to the next slide. So this is more geophysics paid for actually by one of our donors, so who contributed to the getting the team in to do the geophysics on this field. And if you look up in the top right, you can see in that area you can see a sort of square shaped feature, which suggests to us some form of settlement similar to the other sites we've seen, but undatable from the geophysics. So if you go to the next slide, we send out our volunteer field walkers and our metal detectorists, and they plot all their finds on a map. And if you look at this one, that intense group of finds exactly coincides with that feature we saw on the geophysics. And that's a combination of Roman pottery and Roman coins. So we know that site is Roman, and those finds give us the date in the Roman period of that site, and you know, a little bit of information about the status of the site as well and what people were up to there. I couldn't resist showing you this next slide, although it doesn't really fit into my my story, because they also find a lot of random stuff from all periods, some, you know, interesting, some less interesting, but they find some really, really nice things. So this is a high medieval horse harness decoration. So this would be hanging off the horse of one of the lords of the manor of Wimpole, and it's actually in 5 or 6 different bits which were found over about a 3-year period and assembled. So that's a really nice glitzy object. But if you go on to the next slide, rather more fitting into our story, this is a Roman belt fitting associated with the Roman army, and this is my sort of next big change for Wimpole. If we imagine that Iron Age landscape with the little farm and the pigs and the cows and the sheep, that's about 100, maybe 300 meters from Ermine Street. So yeah, in 20 AD, that would have been a very quiet little out of the way spot. But then the Roman army arrived 20 years later and drove Ermine Street northwards, with the legions marching up and down as they spread Roman rule further north as they got to Lincoln and then York. And this little out of the way farm suddenly became right on the edge of the equivalent of the M1 today, with the Roman army marching backwards and forwards. And of course, that's why we get these few Roman military items on some of our little Iron Age farmsteads, because presumably they were doing some kind of trade with the soldiers going up and down Ermine Street, and that would have totally changed the economy of Wimpole, as it changed so much in England with the arrival of the Romans. So that's the end of my sort of little focus on 2 periods of two periods of history at Wimpole. But I just wanted to do two last slides linking with what Tom said. Here's a map of Wimpole. I'm not going to go into it in detail, but you can see it's all covered in green lines, and that's all the archaeology that we found, put on a map. And as Tom said, we've established our troop of Hearts volunteers who go out and monitor the condition of all those sites. So they're out there. Well, they're not out there right now, but they'll be out there tomorrow. Well, they might be. Some of them are very enthusiastic, so they might be out there with torches at the moment. But they're out there. They'll be out there tomorrow monitoring those sites to make sure they're still in good condition. And if they find anything which is troubling, they can alert me, and I can talk to the staff at Wimpole to see if we can solve the problem. But you can see, I can see all these green lines, but I can also see some large areas with no green lines, and I know there's a lot of archaeology there. So that's what I mean about there's more to do at Wimpole. The whole Wimpole estate should be covered in green lines and dots. And my last slide is the next one, I think. Yes, just to say, if you're really interested in archaeology and you're really interested in Wimpole, in September, we're going to be doing an excavation on the North Lawn Gardens. That's going to be a bit of garden archaeology. And I just showed this slide because this is our Cambridge Archaeological Field Group doing an excavation. And they're excavating the 17th century or the early 18th century fountain at Wimpole, and that thing in the middle is the inlet pipe that supplied the water to the fountain, which was done away with in about 1750. So they'll be doing more of this in September. So that's that's where I finish. Thank you very much for listening, and sorry about the glitch in the middle. I hope that didn't get in the way of your enjoyment.
Thank you so much, Tom and Angus. That was so fascinating. I think it's no surprise why people feel so connected to nature when the history is literally under our feet while we're walking through woodlands and things like that. So it's time for questions now. I can see we've had a few in there. I think Tom's answered one, but I will read it out in a moment too. But just in case you do want to ask a question and you haven't found how to pop that to us yet, there is a Q&A button at the top of your screen. It's a little question mark inside a speech bubble. So hopefully you'll be able to see that. And yeah, if you type in your question and it will come through and we can try our best to answer them all. So yeah, the first question, I won't ask Tom and Angus to answer it, but I thought it might be helpful for other people just in case I haven't looked into the Q&A bit yet. Marie kindly asked, are we able to access the National Trust Heritage Records online website? And Rachel's answered in there and actually provided a link. So if anyone's interested in that, go and take a look and you should be able to access the site through there. And then Marie has also wrote a lovely comment, which I'm going to read out. And then Tom, maybe you want to kind of divulge a bit more into what you said, because it's really interesting. I'm not surprised that research suggests a connection between heritage and well-being. Simply being outdoors, we all know, is good for our well-being, but there's also the idea of connecting to the past, knowing where we've come from and what makes us what and who we are. Did you want to add anything, Tom?
Yeah, I've put a little reply, but I think it's what a lot of us just feel instinctively around the ability to relate to the past and provide context for ourselves and who we are and why the world is the way it is and what's our place within it. It's a source of so much sort of meaning for us, and it's so important for the stories we tell ourselves and a sense of belonging and all of those things. And I've said as well, there are some really moving examples. I mean, we as archaeologists, we love doing archaeology, and it is great fun, as well as being challenging, but that's always part of the fun. And there are some amazing examples of archaeology being used, the process of doing archaeology being used as an active therapy, particularly with organisations like Operation Nightingale working with rehabilitation of servicemen and women from the armed forces through archaeology, and it's an incredibly powerful experience actually doing archaeology. It's a team activity, it's a social activity, it's an amazing skills and confidence building activity. We see that working with children and young people a lot, and I mentioned some emerging research that we're doing, which is with the team responsible for developing the idea of nature connectedness, the University of Derby team, around thinking about heritage connectedness as a counterpart to that. And that sense, not just of the benefit that I might get from visiting a historic place, but actually thinking about visiting a historic place as being one of the pathways to feeling a sense of my connection to heritage that I kind of hold within me. And the research is showing that that's really strongly linked to well-being, as much or more so than things like nature connectedness and social connectedness, but also that it's linked to things like the pro-nature conservation behaviours. And actually our ability to place ourselves in that context of time, it stretches out both ways, and we start being able to place ourselves more into the future, and that seems to be encouraging us to act more for the future. I think it's an incredibly powerful tool that's and a powerful thing that we've struggled to kind of articulate. I think it's something that we feel, but actually describing it and understanding it is something that we're kind of just starting to do. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, really interesting. So the next question is, how many of these excavated sites at Wimpole are visible to us visitors? So that one's for you, Angus.
Hope you can hear me, because I can see
We can hear you.
My wobbly Suffolk Wi-Fi is not doing very well at the moment. Yes, Well, that's an interesting question, because actually the majority of the sites, many of the ones that I showed you, are actually in the arable area of Wimpole, so they are completely invisible. But actually within the park, where we started with John Pratt and William Whitton, you can actually literally stand on John Pratt's, well, you can stand in his front room. It's just a lump in the park now, but you can see the houses, you can see all the ridge and furrow of those strips that Benjamin Hare surveyed. But that's just within the park, where the creation of the park preserved them. Outside the park, where arable agriculture continued, it's all been smoothed away and it's just visible underneath. So that's a challenge for us in terms of interpretation, because so many of we've got these fascinating archaeological stories, but often the places where they happen, it demands a lot of imagination on the part of the visitor to conjure up a picture of those people's lives in the park in the past, and that's one of our challenges for interpretation.
Yeah. So we've got another question. So are large-scale media events like Time Team helpful to good archaeology, or distracting from longer-term patient work? Who wants to take that one?
Well, I'll start with that one, because funnily enough, we have Time Team actually sponsoring an excavation at Sutton Hoo this year, from May the 19th to June the 13th, and they sponsored another excavation last year. But this is different to their normal approach. This is a very painstaking excavation. So I think, in terms of Time Team, that they've revolutionized the public understanding of archaeology by focusing on the process of archaeology rather than the end product. I think people have seen how archaeology is done, and the imagination and patience that you have to have. That 3-day thing made it work for TV, but certainly that's not the approach they're taking at Sutton Hoo. So I would always say that sort of media archaeology is very, very helpful, but if you're involved in it, you do have to be willing to sort of hold your hand up and stop them when they say, please dig that up quickly, we've got to get it on camera before we all go home this evening. So there is tension, but the end product, I would say it's positive for archaeology.
Thank you. Thanks, Andy, for that question. So we've got a couple more. So we've got, could Tom elaborate on archaeology volunteering opportunities, please?
Yes, absolutely. So I mean that I mentioned our heritage and archaeology ranger teams, and those are the sort of the core volunteering roles, the ongoing volunteering roles across our places. And there are ways to find out about that through the Heritage Records Online website that we've talked about. But it's absolutely worth keeping an eye out for some of those excavation opportunities, those opportunities to take part. A lot of the time those are happening through specific projects. So obviously we have the work at Sutton Hoo. We have excavations happening this year. Gosh, I'm thinking we're at Attingham. We have other excavations happening in the South Downs. So there are various opportunities across the country that it's worth keeping an eye out for, and we're hoping to find better ways of making those more visible to more people. What's true is that those opportunities are always oversubscribed, and so I'm really interested in how we can create more of those opportunities, how we can create maybe lasting archaeological presences, fieldwork presences at a number of National Trust sites which have this incredible archaeology, which we have really only scratched the surface of. So I'm really keen for us to think, certainly over the next 10 years, about how many more people can get hands-on with doing archaeology, because there really is nothing quite like it.
So Angus, I've got a follow-up question for the one about what sites you can see at Wimpole. So we've got, are there then interpretation signs at the few sites now visible for us to imagine what's hidden underneath?
Yeah, there is some interpretation of the history and archaeology at Wimpole, and there's a certain amount online and in guides. But I would say that, if I would say this, but I would say that they could do better. I would like more, and I think that will come. They're very enthusiastic about archaeology at Wimpole, and they are, that's shown by the fact that they're funding this big excavation in September, which will be with volunteers, so there's an opportunity there. So I think that the interpretation will come, and especially as we're just at the point where the stories I've been telling you, we wouldn't have been confident about them 5 or 10 years ago, but the pieces are all falling into place now, and we can be very confident about particularly those two periods I focused on, and tell those stories. So I'm hoping the interpretation of the history and archaeology at Wimpole will be developed more in the coming years. So there is a certain amount now, but I would admit there could be more.
Okay, so we've got one final question, and it's, I'd love to hear more about the work the apprentice archaeologist mentioned earlier is doing, and the role and ambitions of involving young people in archaeology.
Yeah, so we had two apprentices, historic environment advice assistant apprenticeships, who've both actually completed their apprenticeships now. One has gone on to work in commercial archaeology. The other has actually just returned to a position with us in the trust, which is fantastic. They were absolutely brilliant. They were really competitively sought positions. We had an awful lot of people applying for them, including a lot of sort of new graduates, but also people switching career paths. They got involved with all sorts of work, ranging from supporting our archaeology database to going out and doing field work and surveys. Harry, who you saw, obviously got involved with a lot of media work. He was just a fantastic personality and spokesperson, and also both of them involved in a lot of community work, whether it's working with the volunteer teams and training up the Heritage and Archaeology Ranger team volunteers, or whether it was going out into communities and engaging with local school groups or local community groups. Harry, you would have seen on the excavation site at Runnymede in the video in the presentation as well. So they really got a fantastic spread of experience. They also got the opportunity to shadow other bits of our teams in the trust. So our building surveyors, our planning consultants, and I know both of our apprentices commented on the quality of the experience actually that they were able to have with the trust compared to their counterparts who are based in other organizations, because of that amazing thing that the trust does in bringing together that nature, beauty and history. They're bringing all those things together and the amazing breadth of expertise. So that those apprentices have done fantastically. They made a real difference as well to the work that we were able to do. Since then, we're looking for funding opportunities to be able to support more apprenticeships. I think we could be probably 2-year apprenticeships. I think we could be supporting 12 apprentices live across our regions and countries at any one time. So it's an area that we're really looking into. We're working with our apprenticeships team at the moment around the possibility of a couple of apprentices based in London and linked to our London programme work, which would be fantastic. So it's absolutely something that we're keen on, and that the trust is a really great place to deliver. And in terms of children and young people, and we are thinking about that kind of full career pathway, really, I suppose, between an exposure to archaeology at a young age through to seeing archaeology as a possible career. And one of the things that is really high on my wish list is to do much more work with the existing network of young archaeologist clubs, which are administered by the Council for British Archaeology across the UK, and to think about how we can really support those and establish new clubs as well, that give more young people the opportunity to really get to grips with archaeology. We really do see that having a big impact for young people, and I think equally some of that work around making our sites more accessible to schools and young people as part of the curriculum. And that doesn't mean necessarily busing lots and lots of young people out to our sites, but it might mean taking our sites to them, making handling collections available, or opportunities to engage with our sites digitally, to engage with our experts digitally and remotely as well, and to hear voices of people like Angus talking about Sutton Hoo is or you know, any of those other really notable sites and landscapes is a really special thing. So they're all things that I'm really keen that we support and we try to focus on more.
Thank you very much. I think it's really important to get people connecting to the ordinary people of our history. So yeah, thank you so much, both of you. That was really fascinating. So we're at time now and we've got no more questions. So I'm just going to do a final thank you to you all for joining us this evening, for your ongoing support, for any donations you give us, and also for leaving us a gift in your will. We are genuinely extremely grateful. So thank you so much. Hopefully you've enjoyed this evening. We are going to be sending you a recording tomorrow, hopefully, along with a feedback form. Could I please just encourage you to take a look at that? We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your thoughts, because we always want to improve. Okay, so that's it. Thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of your evening. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.